So I'm very happy to introduce the speakers, Michael Fernandez, Jing Quee, Robert Yeo, and our chairperson and moderator for today is Tan Chong Kee. So without any delay, I'll hand it over to Chong Kee.
Thank you, Harish. Okay, can we have the first slide? Right. Now, the history of Singapore in the 50s and 60s, and in fact, the key players from that period. Now, we know actually quite little about the site, during this whole period when there's a lot of political struggles between the PAP and its opponent. We know very little about the players who lost the struggle, because many of them were detained without trial for many years, and most of them have also chosen to remain silent even after their release. So that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. The second thing when we talk about this whole period is that the emotional charge of communist or communist sympathizer has obscured a lot of what had really happened during that period. And that led to a somewhat lopsided understanding of really the foundation history of Singapore as a nation. And because of that, we are really honored and delighted that we have with us today three of our guests, and had all been intimately involved, especially Jing Quee and Michael, with the turbulent events of that time, to give us their personal account of what happened. And we're especially privileged because they have not shared their story with anyone. And Jing Quee had been telling me yesterday that not even with his own wife. So because this is part of, for some reason, this is a part of history and personal journey that a lot of the people who were part of it had chosen not to speak about. And so we are really, really privileged today to be here to witness and to hear the story being told the first time. And I'd like to frame this whole forum actually by the quote that Jing Quee wrote. And this is in reference to the life of Lim Chin Siong, which is another very notable figure in Singapore's history. And Jing Quee, not Lim Siong, but Said Zahari, who can't be with us today. Now, what Jing Quee said about Said is this: Said's experience as a victim reaffirmed, however, that the indomitable human spirit can rise above tragedy to reclaim a fundamental human dignity and integrity. And this is what we really like to focus on today, because, you see, the time now is still not right to discuss some very, very fundamental and key topic surrounding our founding history. This includes questions such as, were the frequent uses of detention without trial justified? Were those detained really communists plotting for violent overthrow of the government? And so on and so forth. We will leave these questions to others in the future generations who will be more able to answer them fully. So today, instead, we will focus on three broad areas. Number one, we would like to introduce the history of Singapore during the 50s and 60s, especially from the point of view of the losers, of whose voice we usually don't get to hear much at all. Second, we would like to focus in talking about this history on the human side of the story, about how those who were detained without trial managed to regain their dignity and continue with their lives thereafter. And three, we would also like to talk about and to hear the personal reflections from the players on what they and us and all of us have learned from our immediate past. Now, the format of today's discussion will be, first I will introduce each of the speakers, who will then take a certain amount of time, between 15 minutes to perhaps half an hour, to talk about their story, their personal story. And then we'll have a little discussion among all the panelists here, and then we'll open it all up to the floor. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to call on Jing Quee, as our first speaker, to tell us about his story. Okay, Harry's going to read a poem by Jing Quee.
Fajar, dawn. I saw them coming from my window, overlooking the deserted street. The dim light shone listlessly, and the dogs had ceased to bark. They came, flashing their torches in this pre-dawn rain, to seek out the stairs towards my incarceration. Knowing at long last they had come, waiting, hearing the shuffles of ominous feet, the rude knock piercing the stillness of the night and opening my freedom to their identification. You know what it's all about. The torch framed my visage. They proceeded to rummage my papers, books, turning my clothes and my drawers. Silently I turned to change. Packed my towel, toothbrush, a cake of soap. Silently I followed the exit into the night, as the rooster awakened to the first cry of dawn.
Mr. Chairman, friends, ladies and gentlemen, this was a short poem I wrote many years ago concerning my detention, the day, in fact, when I was taken away. The word Fajar, in case those of you who don't know, is a Malay word meaning dawn. It is also the name of the organ of the University Socialist Club, to which I was actively involved in my undergraduate years in the University of Singapore in 1960 and 62, and for which I was the editor during this period. I was detained in October 1963, less than 2 weeks after the general elections held in September of that year. I was a candidate for that general election in the constituency of Kampung Glam against Mr. S. Rajaratnam, who was then incumbent and then Foreign Minister of Singapore. I lost that battle by a margin of 200 votes. Within 2 weeks, I was in detention. On the night of the arrest, I had attended a mass rally held at the open grounds in Bukit Timah, just near the university, to discuss a notice served by the government to deregister 7 federations of trade unions, which would effectively put paid to the entire left-wing organizations and trade unions in Singapore. The meeting resolved to stage a token protest general strike for 2 days, 48 hours, to be convened the next morning. The meeting broke up nearly around midnight of that night. I left home together with some friends, colleagues from the Business Houses Union. I was then a paid official of the Singapore Business Houses Union, with its headquarters at Towner Road. The union represents some 10,000 mainly English-speaking workers from the commercial sector, mainly European firms, but also some local firms. We were a few of us, including George Lawrence, who is now deceased, and P. Govindsamy, was sharing an apartment with me in Balestier Road, Singapore. There were two others sharing that apartment. We went back to the apartment and talked in the living room. Somehow we were not tired at night because of the tensions of the day and also the onset of the events before the next few days. It was probably around 3 a.m. before we broke. I returned to my room, which was situated exactly on the second floor, if I'm mistaken, overlooking the street, Balestier Road. Quite amazingly, I saw a few police cars stopping across the road. I called on my fellow residents in the van, and together we watched the police getting out of the cars, carrying the flashlights, crossing the deserted street towards the apartment block in which we were living. S.T. Barney, who was at that point of time the president of SATU, this Singapore Association of Trade Unions, which is the general body for all the referring unions in Singapore, was staying in an apartment in the same block, in another apartment in the same block, with his wife and young infant daughter. It was quite clear to all of us that it was an arrest operation, and it was clear that possibly both Barney and myself, at least, if not others, would be the target. We drifted to the living room and waited, and could hear the shuffles of feet along the steps as they approached the apartment, followed by silence. We have held on for a few more minutes. When nothing happened, someone in frustration asked me whether I want to get out, to leave the apartment. In other words, to evade the arrest. I said no. That is not how it was all about. We would stay. And I told the others all to take a rest, because we do not know when, if ever, they'll come. And we broke up into our separate bedrooms. I moved back into my bedroom, wearing my long trousers and a singlet, and lie down on the bed, waiting. Not sleeping, waiting. About 15 minutes to half an hour, I couldn't have gone. Later, I hear a sharp knock at the door in the stillness of the night. I went out to the living room. The others all congregated in the living room. I motioned to one of them to open the door, which was accordingly done. And the short poem which I've written in simple, broken lines try to capture the tensions and emotions of that early hours in which I was taken away. That night, 30 persons, mainly trade unions, leaders, and some who are candidates in the election were taken. Almost the entire Central Committee of the SATU was taken in, including Esplanade. Several Nanta candidates who had taken part in elections and failed to gain a seat were arrested. They had nothing to do with the unions. 3 candidates who were in fact elected by their constituents, Esplanade for Crawford, Lo Miao Ping for Havelock, and Lee Ti Tong for Bukit Timah, were also detained. They were never given the opportunity to take their oath as members of parliament, and accordingly never became members of parliament as such, although they were duly elected. Needless to say, they were not paid any sum of the emoluments which would have been their entitlement had they taken the oath of office. But the October arrest was the second wave of a much bigger arrest, which started some 8 months earlier. On the 2nd of February 1963, a huge operation codenamed Operation Cold Store was launched, during which about 120 to 135, the numbers vary, were arrested and detained without trial. These events, subsequent arrests took place after this. Michael Fernandez, for example, I think, was arrested in 1964. Cha Taipei, the most famous of the political detainees, was arrested in 1967. These arrests continued even until 1980s. The Marxist conspiracy arrest in 1987. It is no doubt, no wonder, that first the entire left-wing opposition and then the entire opposition itself collapsed, and that's when it was decimated from the political scene. These events took place more than 43 years ago. This means that 2 generations had in fact grown up. We had no knowledge at all of what happened during those early years of our transition to nationhood. With your indulgence, I will try this afternoon to narrate what is it like to be a political prisoner during the 50s and 60s. One of the most frequently asked questions which many of us as former political prisoners were asked was, what is it like inside? It is a deceptively simple question, but yet difficult to answer in a short space of time. Very often, the questioner has come with a set of notions which suggest that a political detainee is different from a convicted criminal. He's allowed to wear his clothes, he could have reading materials. He was just being confined in a space. The truth is, however, I suggest, much more complex. There are two fundamental points to note when we discuss political detainees. First and foremost, there is a fundamental distinction between a political detainee and a convicted criminal. A convicted criminal is subject to a specific charge for which there was an open trial in court, to which he has counsel to argue his case, for which there was an appeal process. And even after the sentence, the court will fix a determined period of time for which he will serve his term of imprisonment. 5 years, 10, 7 years. And those years, even a life sentence, you could get up with remissions in 11 years. So you know, a convicted prisoner knew from day one, after conviction, the precise date to which he would be released. A political prisoner was arrested without a trial, very often, as you note, dragged out in the night, was never subject to any charge in open trial. Technically, the detention order has a lifespan of 2 years, but this is almost ritually extended again and again. So you have stark cases like Cha Tai Po served a total sentence of 27 years. Dr. Lim Hock Siew, close to 20 years. Sai Johari, 17 years. Dr. Po Su Kai, a total of 17 years or so, over 2 periods. The second point to note is that once convicted, a criminal is sent to a definite place for confinement. A political prisoner, on the other hand, is subject to a series of detention centers. He'll be moved and transferred about during the entire period of his detention. Broadly speaking, every political prisoner underwent two specific types of detention. One, a period of solitary confinement, followed by a period of what they term normal detention conditions, and for which it can be reversed. They can be cross-transferred back again and forth. Now, what is a solitary confinement? In the 1950s and 60s, there were 2 principal centers for which political prisoners were held for solitary confinement. And that was the Central Police Station and the CID on Robinson Road. These two centers consist of a series of cells, dark cells, and dungeons. I was taken to Central Police Station soon after my arrest and put into a room, a very dark room, a largish room, larger than your average housing board room, but completely dark, which you cannot distinguish between day and night. A light bulb, dim light bulb shone from the top of the roof. You could not read. You can see to move around. Your bed consists of a cement bed topped over by an old mattress, which is probably, well, since its purchase, filthy, blood-soiled, and sweat, blood and sweat. There was no sheets, no pillowcase. Except for this, the room is entirely bare. You were not allowed, you were asked to dry prison clothes. Your personal clothing were removed and taken out to be placed in a locker just outside at the counter guarded by the Gurkhas. No strings were allowed. You were not even allowed to have spectacles. Any sharp pens or sharp obstacles, for fear that you might do harm to yourself. So we were told. And you are kept in this room for the whole day, whole duration, except for the periods in which you are allowed to be taken out. Food was served to you 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, through an aluminum plate set to the door and removed soon after you finished. When you want to have a bath or to go to the toilet, you have to knock to attract the attention of the Gurkhas. I haven't begun. Really, well, I'll try to wrap up. The Gurkha guards. And I've lost the attract the attention of the Gurkha guards. And sorry, don't worry. I'll come back. I'll come back. Bathing is by an open tap from the wall. And the toilet, well, was putrid. And you are given newsprint. Your bathing and the toiletry were watched by the Gurkhas. It is a clear attempt to demean, humiliate, and dehumanize. There can be no other explanation. So you have to live through this. And when in the cell, you have 24 hours. Even with the best slippers, you probably cannot. There are many hours, at least 12 hours or more, in which you are pretty alert. And if you have suffering, so many of a bad slipper, you will probably have a much more difficult time. So you keep yourself fit alert by doing sport jumping, exercise. I heard some try to do meditation or headstand or singing. I mean, it's not a joke. These are the means, the strategies on which a political prisoner will have to find for himself to get out of this whole rigmarole. Should I stop here for a while? I haven't begun.
Okay, we can go back to more of Jing Quee's story later on during the question and answer. So can I now invite Michael Fernandez to tell us his story.
Thanks, Charlie. As Jing Quee mentioned, I was detained in 1964, September, along with 39 other trade unionists and student and Nanda graduates. I am indeed glad that we have this opportunity to share with you our experiences, what we went through during those periods. Particularly, I see a lot of young people from the university, from the junior college, and people whom I thought I would like to address these remarks. Many of them do not know what went through in the 50s and 60s and even early 70s. That's the reason I agreed to Harish's invitation to participate. Now, I'm going on to 72, not 17, 72. Many years older than Jing Quee. I was born in India. I was brought to Malaya and Singapore by my brother before I became a teenager and had my education in Singapore and Malaysia. And after that, I came to Singapore to study in the Teachers Training College and as a training teacher in St. Patrick's School in 1955. At that time, Tony Tan was in O-level in St. Patrick's School. After I finished my training, I joined the university in 1960 to study law, where I got involved in the University Socials Club along with Jing Quee. And I was very active before that. I used to hang around on the campus because some of my old schoolmates were quite active, like Dr. Pius Martin from Klang, Dr. Kumarasamy, also from Klang. I used to hang around on the campus. And moreover, I was active in the Catholic Swing Teachers Guild in the 50s. And so I knew the campus better before I went in. I wanted to become join the member of the Socialist Club. One bright history student objected to my being a member and told Tomiko, who was the chairman of the Socialist Club at the time, that I do not qualify because I was already a member of the University Catholic Society, Student Society. So that person was overruled and became a full member, and I played my part, and mostly helping to run the business side of Haja for Jing Quee and others in the Central Working Committee. And I had no support from my family because of my visible political profile that was emerging at that time. And I thought I could survive by teaching in the Adult Education Board. But in 1961, after the split in the PAP, the Socialist Club happened to be on the other side of the fence, and my night teaching was stopped by the chairman of the Adult Education Board, at that time, the late Mr. Devanaya. And I could not continue because I didn't pay my tuition fee in 1962. So Professor Jayakumar, who was at that time, I think was the dean, who was involved in the faculty, knew my story, and I had to leave the university. Now, briefly, after I left the university in the mid-62, I went back to Selangor to continue teaching. And I was called back to come and help man one union, that is the naval-based labor union, which was run by Woodhull and later Salahuddin Gauss, whose brother is here, Akram. And the PAP group was trying to take over this union at that time. And they needed a Malayalam-speaking fellow like me. And I sought the advice of many friends, including Tommy Ko, who was then the legal advisor, a very old friend. And I also sought the advice of my old friend, classmate, R. Jody. Both of them advised me against it. Tommy told me, "Do you want to go into jail?" I said, "I'll think it over." So I decided to go in, despite the odds against me. So we went in. I went in, and within a few months, we had a major strike of 11,000 industrial workers in October 7, the day before Jing Quee was arrested and Bali was arrested. We called a strike, and the strike issues were basically economic issues, industrial issues, or grievances of the union. Although it was portrayed as a political strike, it was not. We tried to settle the issues of these economic issues quite genuinely, but I think the government and the Admiralty had a plan of not negotiating, not wanting to settle it, but looking for an opportunity to break the union, banish the leadership, and destroy the union altogether. That was their plan. But nevertheless, the workers, 95% of the workers supported us. And after nearly 30 days, the government found a loophole that we did not have the annual general meeting to elect the leadership in May that year, as required in the Constitution. But this was a technical point, even though we wrote to the Registrar of Trade Union, because of the industrial dispute, we want to defer the election process, which would take about 6 weeks, to a later date. This point was used by the government to declare the strike illegal. And Loka Singh and I have done some research for the history of the trade union. We found out from concretely that Kasing, from his research, found out that it was a technical point. Some historians term that it was too high-handed action to re-register a union and declare the strike illegal, jeopardizing the rice bowl of 11,000 workers and their families. So the strike was declared illegal, and can you see the irony of it? Asking me, I was the paid secretary employed in May 1963, asking me to show cause when the Admiralty had already closed down the union and all the records. How am I to show? We were given until January 7th, 1964 to show cause and why the unions should not be deregistered. Nevertheless, we did reply to whatever information we had. So that is the story of Naval Base. I will now come to the detention. I think the objective of the government in arresting its opponents was to isolate us from active life and also to break us mentally and physically. They tried this several times by depriving us of our freedom, by confining us into long periods of interrogation in solitary prison, solitary confinement, and depriving us of our reading material, depriving us of our food, normal food rations, as well as other means of communication with the outside world. And we also could not have access to our legal counsel unless there was a charge that we want to file in court. Only then we could see our legal advisor. Do you know who our legal advisor was? The judge, V.K. Raja, famous judge now. His father, T.T. Raja, was our legal advisor. Some of you young people who are lawyers may not know who T.T. Raja was. And at first we were confined to some open yard where we were locked up. That is called E-dormitory. I was confined there from 64 to 67, when some of our top leaders were taken away, preparing the ground for some assault on us, like Mahadeva, Dr. Lim Hock Siu, Sai Sahari, Chia Tai Po, who were with us. They were removed to Queenstown prison. And then later, under some pretext, we were manhandled. And many of us were removed into isolation. I was put in a very small cell, and I think the objective was to make me mental case. They brought in the chief of Woodbridge, Dr. Quee, to examine me. The first thing he asked me, do you know what's the date today? Doctor, I know better than you do, please. And he got angry, he went away. And then they brought the famous doctor, Gui Aling, and he was nice, spoke to me very nicely, and examined me and found, well, you are quite alright, physically fit, mentally alert. So I was not sent to Woodbridge, as some of our other friends were. Now this time, I was manhandled. I still have some of the prizes. In 1978, my good old friend Gopal Bharatan removed some of the blood clots I have on my stomach. I still have some of the gold prizes. Some of you get gold prizes for running on the track or doing other things. So this is my gold prize. I still have a few on my stomach that inflicted on us by prison officers during that period. And later we were transferred from there along with the prisoners for 3 years. In the meantime, they were building a new prison for us. It's called Moon Crescent Center. Very beautiful sounding name. And we were removed to Moon Crescent Center in 1970. And there were a lot of restrictions then. Food ration quantity was cut, quality was reduced, and then they were preparing us to do manual labor, just like the convicted prisoners. We refused to do that. So we prepared a long period of preparation, contact with the other blocks. In each block there were 7 or 8 of us. Altogether, I think there were about 200 detainees at that time. So we coordinated all our activities to have a hunger strike, which we started on the 9th of December 1971, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And this hunger strike lasted 135 days. And we decided that we would not drink, we would not take anything except warm water for the first week. I think after the 8th day, many of us collapsed. The government and the prison authorities were worried about our lives. Then they decided to force feed us. I'll try to demonstrate how the force feeding was done. I think some of you may have seen on TV what's happening in other countries. but very few have heard or seen what happened to us. I was made to sit down with my hands behind and handcuffed. One huge warden used to stand on the handcuff so as not to make me move. Then another, what we call a Punjabi warden, the biggest fat, he sat on my laps. And then used the jaw opener to open my mouth. And then he held the jaw opener into my mouth, and then the hospital assistant, there were two hospital assistants and Dr. Naranjan Singh. So the hospital assistant stuck one thick hose into my mouth and using a funnel pour milk into my, I tried to struggle, but could not. And what happened was, the milk, for me in my case, the milk wouldn't stay in my stomach. Soon after the ordeal, either I used to vomit or purge. This was going on for a long time. Now you look at me with a big stomach protruding. In those days I lost a lot of weight and I could not wear my pair of shorts, only my brief, and that also wouldn't stay. So that's what happened. Then they moved me to the prison hospital. I was put on a trip for 23 days. And after even these 23 days, I think this stomach became a bit stabilized. They transferred me back to the prison. And we still continued this ordeal of refusing to eat. They still continue to feed us by force-feeding milk or thin porridge. Then we held on. The government knew for certain that they could not break us physically or mentally. I think a decision was then made to release us slowly, a few at a time. I was sent to the interrogation center in Central Police Station and kept there for 3 months, trying to ask me to give up. I do not know what to give up. I'm a Catholic. I had a simple answer to that. I asked myself, trying to help the workers in particular, is it a sin? The answer came back to me very loud and clear to me, no. So there was nothing to give up. And they knew that they had to release, and international pressure at that time was mounting. So I was released along with Weethotlip in April 1973. Now, I want to add, I'm a trained school teacher. After I was released, in Singapore I had nobody except my wife's people and a cousin, Mary. Parents used to visit me once in 2 weeks, and I have a cousin of mine also once in 2 weeks. So I had no job. I applied to go back to teaching, they would not let me. And I tried to give tuition. Initially I had 13 students. Within 2 weeks, all of them disappeared. And then I sought the advice of friends like Tommy. He advised me to go to selling insurance, which is not my cup of tea, but nevertheless I had to earn a living. Then friends like Jing Quee and others helped me to buy a scooter, and then I went around selling insurance, earned enough money to get married at the end of December. Now, the other point I would like to tell you is this. Even after I was released, the shadows that haunted me were numerous. For example, I'm an active person. I'm not a thinker like or creative person like Jing Quee, I want to do something for the Society of Graduates. I became a member of the university's National University of Singapore Society in 1973 and became a committee member a few years later. And one incident that is still fresh in my mind, in 1987, I was also an active member of the Indian Chamber of Commerce because of my business dealing. I was sent to Japan on a 6-week study tour representing Singapore along with 15 others from different countries to study the small and medium enterprises in Japan. So when I came back, I was chairman of the current affairs in the Guild House. We organized a research project for small and medium enterprises. Surprisingly, 17 members, particularly mostly the academics, volunteered to join this project. So when we got on to serious business, we went to see the EDB, who was responsible for helping the small and medium enterprises. The deputy chairman told me, "Is it any of your business to question us about our work?" I said, "We're just trying to find out to what extent the financial help is effective to these small and medium enterprises. Otherwise, we will suggest some other ways which you can use." So when we came back and reported to the management committee, they said, "Please stop the project. We don't want to have a head-on clash with the EDB." So that is one area. A couple of other incidents, just for example. In 1990, I was living in Toa Payoh in a 3-room flat, and I could see, being a school teacher, I could see a lot of kids running around in the afternoon, even in late at night, not at all doing their homework or studies. I offered to help them help them look after them and do their homework. And this was frowned upon by the CC. He said, "No, you can't do that." Same thing I wanted to do in 1996 when I moved to Upper Boon Keng. A friend in the PA asked me to help. Again, orders from the top, no. So this is what I meant by the shadows of my past were still haunting me, and to a certain extent still haunt me. Now, I think I will stop for now and answer other things during discussion time. Thank you. I remember, I just want to recall one incident in 1958, when I was a young trainee student teacher in St. Patrick's School. There was a meeting of all Catholic teachers in St. Patrick's School, and there was a discussion by Frank James, the senior teacher in SGI, who was a leader in the LIFSOC party, Liberal Socialist Party, C.C. Tan's party. So they were urging the teachers, we shouldn't support political parties which are not supportive of the Catholic Church. Like a little young punk, I asked, we have so many political parties, PAP, of course, is not, again, anti-Catholic Church. Workers' Marshals Party, definitely not. LIFSOC, not. I'm sorry, not PAP. LIFSOC, not. And Workers' Party, no. And then the other parties, no. The only other party that you can accuse them of not supporting wholeheartedly the Catholic mission schools would probably be PAP. Is that what you mean? Oh, there was a complete silence. Mind you, 2 months later, the brother director asked me to find another school to finish my training. So I was sent by the Teachers Training College principal sent me to an Ulu school in Bukit Timah. because I could not sit for my exam without passing my practical test exam in teaching practice. That's one incident. Secondly, I was very supportive when the PAP came into power, and we were very euphorious. And Tomiko and I, and with Linda Chen, went to meet Yong Nyok Lin on the new education policy. We published this account interview in the Fajar, all sorts of things. Suddenly, the policies became sour, and there was difference of opinion in the leadership of the party. And Fajar the socialists took a principled stand. And as a result, we were ostracized. And I think I mentioned to you, I lost my evening job as a part-time teacher. So what was the difference actually? We were detained because of different views and different approach to problems, social problems, political problems. Is there anything else we did? Did we resort to violence? No. There was no evidence brought against us as resorting to violence. Was there any threat to any of the political leadership? Physical threat? No, as far as I can remember, none. And why were we incarcerated for 27 years, 17 years, 19 years, 9 years, 6 years, 4 years? Why? So, there must be some reckoning, rethinking. It's because they just wanted us out of the way, not to become nuisance, create trouble for them. Having achieved these things, for example, merger and other things, was there any necessity for Chia Taipo to be kept 27 years in prison? One of the reasons why he was kept 27 years, I understand, is during the debate in Malaysian Parliament in September 1964, Taipo attacked Lee Kuan Yew personally. I listened to the debate. You know, MM has got a very long memory of non-forgiveness, politically. So I think if there is going to be some new terms of rethinking, as Jing Quee has mentioned, that the people who have suffered, there must be a general amnesty for them. Be recognized that they were loyal, true citizens, contributing to the needs and progress of people of Singapore and for Singapore. This, I think, must be made an admission, not individually, generally. Then lift all the restrictions and things that are in the way of our playing a new, useful role, either civic or otherwise, in society. I think that would be quite good enough for the time being. Thank you.
Actually, hearing what you guys said and in answer to Francis and Robert's question, it sounds as if the healing process is really not really about just the detainees' healing process. It's also actually the general healing process of the whole nation. Yeah, because if you look at Singaporean nowadays, how afraid we are to talk about anything politics, it's an obvious sign of something really hurting there and you don't want to touch it because it's still painful. And that process of healing really hasn't completed yet. So is there any other questions?
Yeah, here. Hello. Yeah.
Okay, a lot of hands.
I have two questions, two broad questions. The first question is about the medium. You know, dramas, plays have been written, and then you guys write autobiographies about detention. What about film, i.e. documentary or feature films? I know that in Singapore you have the Political Film Act, but you can cloak it in a feature film. Say for example, recently there's this movie, Good Night, Good Luck, which is about the McCarthy scare. So it's a political film, but sometimes you can cloak it in such a way that it's not a political film. But anyway, I want to ask, why is it, has any filmmakers approached you to make a documentary or to make a film about this? Because I think that it will capture a greater audience. Okay, my second question is about Chia Tai Po. How is he? Do you know? Are you friends with him? Do you keep contact with him? Because I'm curious about him. Thanks.
Since there are so many hands raised, let us just let the voices from the audience come through first before we go back to the panelists.
Terima kasih Tuan Pengerusi. Nama saya Selvi Ahmad. Maybe I should begin this first. I'm pretty concerned when you introduced the speakers and you said they were on the losing side, they were losers. That sort of shocked me. I would rather you say they were marginalized voices, you know, things like that. It was, ugh, like, oh God, I think the toll for the whole thing. After you was an apology. I would like to support Jing Quee when he said that the healing has to be a bit more because of the total amnesia. I went to varsity in the mid-70s and I really am not interested in Operation Cold Store. Even if it's there, I'm not interested because, you know, the government knows best and all that. I only met Jing Quee 2 years ago in some conference in university. But I have unlearned all of that abroad. I do not live in Singapore. I'm Singaporean in case they say you don't have no rights to speak. But I'm saying that the chairman posed a question and I want also to perhaps Michael and Jing Quee to respond to what I have to say. In the healing process, when you say Singaporeans are afraid and so on, I mean, you can't be afraid until there is something that is hovering over you. So my question to Michael and Jing Quee would, for instance, the repeal of repressive laws like ISA, for instance, which is the law that governs Operation Cold Store and Operation Spectrum, and maybe others we do not know because we don't have freedom of information, would that be a first step in the process? Thank you.
Some more hands out there.
Hi, thank you for sharing your lives with us. Just like to ask, having been at the vanguard of left-wing politics 2 generations ago, what would you say to young people today who are disenchanted with the right-wing policies and position of the PAP?
So another hand out there in the center. Answer the mic. Thanks.
Hello, good afternoon. My question is, had that detention not happened, had you been allowed to do what you were doing during that time, what do you think were the changes Singapore could have had in today's social and political climate, for example? Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, this one over there. See that?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here to see all of you. I'm someone who lived through the 1980s and followed Operation Spectrum very closely. And out of that, I also learned about Operation Cold Store and what happened during the 50s and the 60s. Now, I have a very different view on history, as with most of my colleagues or my students that I've been to school with. But I have one question to ask. Michael, you talk about general amnesty as a way for perhaps a closure, a meeting of 2 sides of the political divide. I have one question. I read about an Italian Marxist, Antonio Gramsci. He wrote what is called the prison notebooks. Now, he was a pain, he was a thorn in Mussolini's side in his years. And Mussolini told the prosecutor, I want you to cause this brain to stop functioning for the next 20 years or so, in those words. Now, when I see all of you here today, I realize that if I may draw the analogy, that hasn't worked. Your brains are still functioning. Okay, your spirit is still willing. I'm not sure whether it was broken. I doubt so. My question is, what is your prognosis now for people like us who are aware of the 80s, the 70s and the 60s of what happened? I'm partly a disillusioned man, trying to come to terms with what has happened in the past. This is the 21st century. What is your prognosis for us in politics? Thank Thank you.
Any more questions you want to get in before we pass it back to the panelists? Good, okay, guys.
Now, the first thing is the answer to the first question, whether I've been approached to record our experiences. Oral history has recorded my experiences, my story in 1981 and 82, which are available for anyone who wants to read about what I did or what I went through. But nobody has approached us in Singapore to record my experiences on film or in audio outside. I suppose obviously you know that it is not easy to do. But I would like to add again, Syed Sahari, who is a Singaporean who lives in Subang Jaya in KL with his children, or near his children, has been approached many a times to record his views and experiences on many a time by various media representatives, Australians, Hong Kong, British, and quite often he's been asked to give his views on record. And recently, I think you may have read that our Singaporean film writer, Martin C, has recorded a film on Syed Sahari, which I don't know when Martin is going to release it, probably when the book is launched. That's the first thing. Secondly, about Zakir, is that your name, Zakir Hussain? No, there are just some gentlemen who asked me the question, my prognosis for the young people. Oh, okay, doesn't matter, sorry. Now, I have no formula or formulae for the young people. All I can say is that please try to read up. There's increasingly quite a bit of literature coming up about the vanquished, people like us, stories of the vanquished. Read them. Try to compare for yourself which is the truth. And plan your own development, plan your own action, plan of action or thinking, what you consider is good for Singapore. And I don't think it is proper for me to prescribe what you need to do for the people of Singapore and for your own growth and development. And there's another question I missed. Chia Taipo. Chia Taipo, I'm not in touch with him. I know he was doing some research for his PhD, and at what stage it is in, I don't know. And once in a while about him. Although I lived with him, with Syed Sahari for 4.5 years, like Tan Gok Fang, one of our fellow detainees who is there, and I don't know where he is at the moment, what he is doing. We all wish him well and in his career as a researcher and writing his story for the people of Singapore. Any other question I missed? Sorry? ISA. ISA was framed, not the new law, the old law was framed by the British to fight their main enemy standing in the way of their continued rule, that is the MCP. And they have used the ISA against its political opponents who had no violent means of overthrowing the government, but through peaceful means by peaceful ideas and debate and discourse. Yet we were incarcerated for that method we adopted. So is it fair that ISA being used against political opponents with differing views? I think the people must make a decision. And nowadays ISA is not often used against police. Since 87, the, the Marxist conspirators were detained, like Teo Solan, Casey Chu and others. It's not been used quite often, but it is increasingly being used, so-called terrorists, Al-Qaeda and others. Now, so long as the statute is there, it can be used against anybody. Whether or not you think it should be abolished, you decide.
Can I say a few words? Indisputably, ISA is the main inhibitor of any so open political discourse. I think that of that there is no doubt. There can be no doubt. The ISA had its genesis during the British time. In 1948, it was introduced by the British as emergency temporary provisions to counter the communist insurgency. It has been renewed every 6 years. Since then, it has undergone various permutations. In Singapore, it first became the PPSO, the Preservation of Public Security Ordinance, during the time of Marshall. And I think if there's one thing which probably we can have against Marshall, it was that for some reason he succumbed to his original opposition to the whole question of arbitrary detention. Marshall was, after all, a lawyer. But I think perhaps the period, the times, so when the temporary provisions was taken away, it was perpetuated and became an act, an ordinance in those years. And in 1960, it underwent another transformation and became the Internal Security Act, the ISA. I think whatever rationale it had in the past has long gone. And we have seen how it has been turned into an instrument of repression, first against the communists indisputably, then against all left-wing opposition of whatever shade, then against chauvinists, communalists, code words all, black operations, Marxists, conspirators, and even against all opposition, or the potentiality of his abuse, not the actuality of his abuse, not even the potentiality is there. And I think those of us who have gone into political detention are acutely aware that as long as the ISA is in the statute books, we can never have, there can never emerge in Singapore an open, democratic, pluralist society. I think of this, I think many of us are very clear.
Also, Jing Quee, to bring it to present day, I would say that in your time, the ISA legislation is the main piece of legislation that concerns you guys. But today, if you look at, politicians today, I suppose politician of your time, the key piece of legislation is no longer ISA, but the defamation laws. So you notice a shift as well.
Well, the defamation law is always there. The problem of the defamation law is that I'll stop using the ISA law, and the defamation law was an old archaic law which has been taken out of most jurisdiction. Defamation as a form of action, as a civil form of action, in other words, by a private individual suing another private individual, it's always available to anyone, and it should be there. is there under common law. In other words, you can abuse someone and get away with it. But you have to institute civil proceedings for damages. Criminal defamation is another creature itself. But in Singapore, what was known as civil litigation, civil defamation, has been used as a political instrument. And that is something new. And I think something which is pertinently observed by George Soros recently when he came to Singapore. When he mentioned that, how can you talk about open liberal society when you use defamation proceedings against your political opponents? This is not, well, not even, well, I would say not cricket, definitely not cricket. You just don't do that. Political contestation has a different flavor. And in the British example, in US example, I mean, you can never succeed in any civil defamation suit against your political opponent. I mean, the names that the US politicians call one another. Because there's an acceptance that certain exceptions, qualifications must be granted in the heat of political debate. After all, the political debate is directed towards a political election for which the people, the electorate, is the final judge and not a court of law. But to use such a process in a court of law is I think, a Singapore innovation. Maybe not. It is. On the other point, I've just got, on the other point, a question of one journalist talking about whether, what is to be done. I think, as Michael said, there can be no description. I can only say this. Throughout history, in my view anyway, throughout history, there are two abiding principles which have dominated all political thinking. And this was openly proclaimed during the French Revolution: equality, fraternity, liberty, fraternity, inequality. Fraternity is, of course, in a way to be equated with equality. So the two guiding principles in legal discourse and open social political debate have always been what being called the libertarian perspective as against the egalitarian perspective. These are the two dynamics which will always be there. Maybe you can say in Russia they call it egalitarianism far too seriously and lead you to the disaster which happened. And in China, the same thing, leading to the effects of the Cultural Revolution. But the question is China trying to resolve this contradiction between liberty and equality, or it is abandoning one limb on the other? This is a question which no one can answer. But as long as a human society exists, I think there will be people who will argue for, who will agitate for equality. There will be people who will agitate for liberty. Whatever forms this agitation organization will take to pursue these objectives must be left to the people at the time. And I don't think this illusion can come into the picture at all. There will always be people who believe in these principles. Otherwise, we'll have a dead society.
None of you have addressed one question, which was what would happen to Singapore if the arrest didn't take place. I'd like to quote actually Professor Harper, who's a historian at Cambridge University, when he wrote about Lim Chin Siong. What he said was this about Lim Chin Siong's politics. What lay at its core was a form of politics that gathered momentum by bridging, rather than by seeking to surmount the differences. What he's basically saying is that he noticed this very big difference, two very fundamental difference in the way politics was conducted, between that of the PAP and between that of Lim Chin Siong and his band of friends. Which is that Lim Chin Siong tried to bridge differences. So instead of trying to suppress things and arrest people and trying to get everyone to go on the unified pace, he was trying to bridge, trying to see each of the group, the Malays, the Chinese, the Christian, and so on, what is it that we're really concerned about, and how can they bring everyone on board by respecting all the differences, the bridging process. I think what is really lost in the whole suppression and the arrest without detention is the spirit of bridging in the political life of this country. What would have been different, I think, would be probably an atmosphere here in Singapore in terms of not just politics, but social discourses and even everyday life, where differences is more respected, where bridging is the principal means of moving ahead as opposed to surmounting and suppressing of differences. What that means in terms of, which a lot of people would ask in result of that is economic development and so on and so forth. That is a hypothetical question. It's very hard to answer one way or another. You can always point to other nations where such arrests didn't take place but still developed. So it's definitely not a must. Singapore, it's very hard to sustain a proposition that said Singapore would not have developed economically if arrest has not taken place. So I don't think I can be here to argue that point, but to simply point out what would have been different probably would be the tenor of engagement in Singapore. So is there any other questions before we close? Okay, last remaining questions before we close. Sorry, okay, I've been told by Harish that we have completely run out of time. So I'll need to end the formal proceeding here. If all of you have further questions, you're welcome to come up to talk to any one of us. So I'd like to take this opportunity then to thank our panelists, Michael Fernandez, Jing Quee, and Robert Yo.